Welcome to Paradigms at paradigms.life, the radio show and podcast that brings you inspiring people with visions of a viable future for life on Earth that includes humans. Hi, I'm Baruch, host of the show. Thanks for tuning in. I'm really happy to bring you our guest in this episode. He is a photographer. He's been photographing all around the world for many decades, and he's just published a new book of photos and essays from his visit to Ukraine shortly after the war began. He's going to talk to us about his experience and more. It's always interesting to do a radio show about a visual art form. So as you listen to the show, you can go to the Paradigms website, paradigms.life, and there's a link there to his photographs. So let's meet him now on this episode of Paradigms. Christopher Briscoe, welcome to Paradigms.
I am so happy to be here.
It is mutual. I'm really glad that my friends recommended I talk with you. I've been reading your book, your beautiful book of photographs and kind of essays. You know, it's just an amazing book. The Child on the Train and Other Stories in War-Torn Ukraine. I mean, it's just so lots to talk about.
Yeah.
Before we get into some of those particulars, tell me a little bit about yourself just as a person, where you grew up, how you got into doing the work you do, and your inspirations.
Well, I grew up mainly in Santa Barbara, California. I've always been a photographer ever since I took my first class in Santa Barbara High School 100 years ago. The thing that really drives me is really my passion. There are a jillion photographers out there, much better than I am, but a long time ago, I took a workshop from Jay Mizell, and he went around the table and he said, "So all you photographers, tell me, how do you know when you've taken a good picture?" And they all gave their explanation. When it got to me, I just didn't even think. I said, "When it makes me cry." And I can remember being in the darkroom 40 some years ago and just weeping when the image came up, and it happens to me consistently. And I just know that when it happens, it reminds me that I'm doing exactly what I was meant to do.
Well, I wept all the way through The Child on the Train, so I think that we're on the same page.
I'm really honored that you had that reaction to my book, because, you know, we all die once, but the tragedy is that every once in a while we die twice. And that's when we are forgotten. And that's why this book is so important for people to read. I do not want people to be forgotten that are in that book.
It's very, very potent. You know, let's just jump right in. Okay, this war in Ukraine, you know, there's lots of talk about why and how and the politics, and did NATO push Putin into a corner and blah, blah, blah. And we all have thoughts about that. But you look at these pictures and none of that matters.
Yes, none of that matters. All they want is to keep their own country. All they want is to keep their own lives in their town, in their home. At the beginning, I was in a refugee camp on the border of Poland and Ukraine. And every single refugee that I interviewed, the first thing they said, "I want to go home." I was there 3 weeks into the war, and the flood of refugees across the border was amazing. And then just a couple weeks later, it was like 50-50 going back, 50-50 coming to Poland. And then it kind of turned around.
Well, the desire for home, I mean, isn't that one of the most basic human impulses?
Yes. And what is normal? Their normal lives. I interviewed this sweet little girl named Julia, and they escaped in the middle of the night, and the missiles were dropping around. It took them, usually it takes 8 hours to get from their town to the Polish border. It took them 3 days. And I asked her, I said, "So when you had to grab everything and get out of your house, what did you grab?" She says, "Well, I grabbed my little puppy." And I said, "What's the one thing you had to leave behind that you wish you didn't?" And 10-year-old Julia says, "My pet snails." And I went, "What?" She says, "I've collected these snails for more than a year. And I love my snails, but my mom told me, honey, there's just not room in the car for your pet snails.
And that is one of millions of stories like that. I hope listeners will look at the book, look at the images. There will be some of them on the website, but really doing a radio show about images is a little weird because we're talking and no one can see it. And these images are so powerful. So you'll just have to be our image producer.
I'll do my best. I will paint them right here for you.
Tell me some more stories.
Well, there's so many. And I have to preface this by saying that in a month or two, I'm going back. I was there for 3 months. And unfortunately, my visa ran out. I came home and I didn't anticipate this, but I was, for the first couple of weeks of my return, I was in bed more than out of bed. I went to a shrink and he said, you have PTSD. I went to my physician. She said the same thing. And it took me a few weeks to crawl out. And that's why writing the book really helped me, because it really helped me to reconnect with all of the people I met all over Ukraine. And I went right up to the Ukraine-Russian front. And for one day, I had to wear body armor. But it helped me connect with the purpose of why this book is so important. So that's why I'm going back.
I'm talking with Christopher Briscoe about his latest book, The Child on the Train, and other stories in war-torn Ukraine. We'll be back with more of this conversation, but first some music. This is a Neil Young song, performed by Ann Wilson of the band Heart and featuring Alison Krauss, War of Man. You're listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.
Across the heavens to the other side, on wings of magic does the little girl ride. Creatures running from the cold, back to the nest just like the days of old. They're in the safety of a mother's arms, the warmth of ages far away from home again. Ears ringing from the battle fire, the tired warrior aims a little higher. The black falcon, oh, the little sparrow. The healing light, oh, the flash of the barrel. No one wins, it's a war of man. Silver mane flying in the wind, down through the planets on the run again. No one knows where they're running to, but every kind is coming two by two. Out on the delta where the hoofbeats pound, the daddy's running on the frozen ground. Can smell the poison as it follows him, can see the gassing machine. It's a war of man. Yeah. Oh, oh, yeah. winds to the other side. On wings of magic does the little girl ride. Baby creatures run from the cold. Back to the nest is like the days of old. They're in the safety of a mother's arms. The warmth of ages away from home again. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Hey, no one wins. It's a war of man. It's a war of man. No one wins now. It's a war of man. It's a war of man.
That's Ann Wilson doing justice to Neil Young's song, War of Man. All right, let's get back now to my conversation with photographer Christopher Briscoe. And just a little note about PTSD. Listeners know I'm a mental health professional. You don't have to be the person being bombed to have traumatic stress from an experience, because there's something called secondary post-traumatic stress. If you're with people who've been through it, you're going to pick up on it, because
Yes.
it's actually it's a disruption in the vibrational field of the human. Violence disrupts our vibe. You know, this may sound a little woo-woo to people, but I'm sure this can be measured. When we experience that kind of disruption, it screws with our brain. And so whether it happened to you or it happened to the person you're talking to that you're empathizing with, it affects us. It affects us all the way around the world. So when people have all these feelings, when people look at these pictures and cry, that's important.
Well, the interesting thing, and just kind of observing myself during these past few months of reentry, I have told some of these stories to friends of mine, to groups, maybe 50 or 60 times. And I'm always surprised at the fact that I start weeping at the same stories. And I said, wait a minute, I've given the story like how many times? And it still brings me to tears. And sometimes at the beginning of a talk, like to an audience, I'll just apologize up front and say, look, these stories are really close to me. And if I start bawling, I apologize. Yeah, one of the first stories I did, beside the sweet Julia with the snails, is this woman named Anastasia. And she lived up kind of near the border of Russia. And she lived in a town just like in Southern Oregon or Massachusetts or anywhere. It was beautiful. It was kind of a coffee shop kind of town. And she taught Pilates. And her dad was helped out at the local hospital for people who wanted to donate blood. And she lived in her own apartment. And when the missiles started to fall, she went to her girlfriend's house because her girlfriend's place had thicker walls. So meanwhile, she wasn't really aware of this, but her dad was at the hospital. So she's at her girlfriend's. And when the bombs and the missiles started to fall, the windows of the hospital imploded. And the patient that her dad was with dropped out of a heart attack like that. So Anastasia's at her girlfriend's house. Her girlfriend's taking a shower. All of a sudden, Anastasia looks out the front window, and there's a Russian tank on their front lawn. So she's banging on the bathroom. You got to get out of the shower now. There's a Russian tank on your front lawn. They throw everything they can in the car. So now they've got to make another run for the border, which again is several days. All of the traffic that was going both ways is now 4 lanes going toward the border. And of course, people are running out of fuel, and there's snow, and people are on the side of the roads pulling their suitcases, and then they can't pull their suitcases and hold their pets and their kids at the same time, so they let go of the suitcases, and the wind blows open the suitcases, so now the clothes are blowing through the snow, and Anastasia's in this car just trying to get to the border. And all the time, her mom is texting her, Anastasia, when you get to that border, whenever it is, I want you to promise me that you are going to take a picture with your phone when they stamp that Polish stamp onto your passport so that I will know that you are safe. So all of these things that are in the story of trying to get to the border, and finally, after a few days, Anastasia finally makes it.
Wow.
And then she takes a picture, sends it to her mom, and her mom texts back, I have some very sad news to tell you about your father. A few minutes after his patient dropped dead of a heart attack, Anastasia's father dropped dead of a heart attack. So it's stories like these that just, the book almost wrote itself.
We are so used to hearing and seeing these things with a great remove that gives us space from it, and so it doesn't seem quite real.
Mm-hmm.
But it is real.
It's very real. And one of the frustrating things for me is I would post stories on my Facebook page every few days. And I was just so humbled by the huge response that I had. And this is 3 weeks into the war and 4 weeks into the war. And then all of a sudden, the conversation shifted to who slapped who at the Oscars. Then shortly after that, it was poor Johnny Depp got slapped by his wife. And then after that, it's Harry got slapped by Andrew, his brother. And I was so frustrated because in Ukraine, every single conversation is around the war. On Sundays, little old ladies get together with buckets full of fabric, and they put up these old fishing nets, and they talk, and they all weave these pieces of fabric through the fishing nets to make camouflage for the tanks, for the troops, for the guys in the trenches. College kids get together in the park, and they teach CPR classes. And then another guy, a second-year law student, he and his buddies make Molotov cocktails. And I took his class on how to make a Molotov cocktail. So if you ever need to know the secret ingredients, give me a call. But they've made a few thousand of these Molotov cocktails. They put them in crates, they put them in their van, and they take them to the front. Every conversation, every thought is about the war, not about who slapped who at the Oscars.
I hope you're enjoying my conversation with Christopher Briscoe, talking about his new book, The Child on the Train, and Other Stories in War-Torn Ukraine. It's a beautiful book, beautiful in a painful, poignant way. And as you can tell, Chris Briscoe is a person of conscience and deep feeling. Let's hear some more music, and then we'll be back with more conversation. This is Jackson Browne, The Drums of War.
What were those freedoms for? Let's not talk about it anymore. Roll out the drums of war. 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 If you wanna even up the score. Whatever you believe the necessary course to be depends on who you trust to identify the enemy. Who beats the drums for war? Even before the peace is lost, who are the prophets for? Who are they who bear the cost when a country takes the road of war? Who gives the orders to torture? Who gets to no-bid contract the future? Who lies, then bombs, and calls it an error? Who makes a fortune from fighting terror? Who is the enemy trying to crush us? Who is the enemy of truth and justice? Who is the enemy of peace and freedom? Where are the courts now when we need them? Why is impeachment not on the table? We better stop them while we are able. Roll out the drums of war. 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 If you know. Roll out the drums of war. Whatever you believe the necessary course to be depends on who you trust to identify the enemy. Who took this country to war long before the peace was lost? Who are the prophets for? Who are they who bear the cost? Who lay down their lives? Who will live with the sacrifice of our best and brightest hopes, the flower of our youth, of freedom and the truth?
The Drums of War, that's Jackson Browne, from his album Time the Conqueror. We're talking with Christopher Briscoe, who's a photographer who's been to Ukraine and published a book about that visit. The war in Ukraine continues. It's not the only place on earth where there is war. It's a terrible thing, war, wherever it's happening. All right, here's the next part of my conversation with Chris Briscoe. Part of what you just said makes me think about the ways that people glorify war, because I know that's not what you're doing. In the United States, we tend to glorify our aggression. When we invaded Iraq illegally, suddenly there were flags everywhere, and they were trying to invoke World War II type patriotism. It didn't work. It's not glorious. There's nothing glorious about this. It's just creating suffering.
Yeah. And the irony, Baruch, is that we don't learn from it. We didn't learn from Vietnam. when I was with this group of doctors on the Polish border in the very beginning, I took a day off and I went to Auschwitz. And it was raining and snowing, and much of the tour, 3 hours long, was outside. And here we were just a couple hours drive from the border. And I walk into Auschwitz and there's this plaque that says, and I'm paraphrasing, but basically it says, those of us who don't learn from history are going to repeat it. And here I was, a couple hours drive from the Ukraine border.
You know, my family recently discovered a cousin who lives in Denver. He's turning 98 in June, and he escaped Auschwitz right before the liberation. His grandson made a film about it. They went back to Romania, to the village where my father was also born, and they made a film about going back in 2005. And these things that we keep doing as humans, I say we, I'm not doing it, but we humans keep doing these same things. We do keep repeating these same mistakes. And I'm sure lots of people we know rack our brains over how can we stop doing this foolishness. And there's lots of really great, brilliant answers, but the real answer is everyone has to make that choice, and that's not what's happening.
That's right. That's right. So another group of people that I really got to respect a lot were all of the volunteers that I saw coming from all over the world, really. And sometimes they were docs, EMTs from Israel. Sometimes they were from all different parts of the United States. The doctor who invited me initially is from Portugal. Then I was in a distribution center near the refugee camp on the border. All these guys are packing things up to take to the vans across the border to get them to the soldiers. And there was this guy named David who was a cook, and he was from Wales. So he's in this huge room with all these supplies coming and going, and the sleeping bags are in the corner, and that's where people are sleeping. And he's just stirring this huge pot of soup. And I said, so David, where are you from? He says, well, I'm from Wales, and I'm a cook there. And I just was sitting there watching the news like everyone else, and I was compelled to get off the couch and come here and volunteer. So I work here cooking for all these volunteers, sometimes 14, 15 hours a day. And he's stirring this big pot of soup. And I said, so David, when your time is up here and you have to go back to Wales to your other job, what's the one takeaway that you're going to take with you? And he looked at me and he thought, and he says, that I am a good person. And that just floored me. And I thought, I still think about it so much that, isn't that what we all want, is to do something in our lives just to make a little dent on the planet and be a good person. And I met another guy who had his brand new gull-wing Tesla, and he's from Lyon, France, and he drove it all the way across Europe to this huge refugee center on the Polish border. Actually, it was an old mall that had been reconverted into a refugee center, and where the hairstylist place was, now that's the medic camp. And this huge auditorium opens up, and there are hundreds of cots in there with an equal number of people, and the loudspeakers are going off announcing arriving buses. And so this guy from Lyon, France drives in with his Tesla into this parking lot, and he has to show his passport to get vetted and everything. And that takes a few minutes. And then all of a sudden, this family of 7 are piling into his Tesla, and he doesn't have room for everybody in their suitcases. So he empties out the suitcases, and they just jam in all their clothes in between the seats. And he drives them all the way back across Europe, back to Lyon, gets them an apartment, and changes their lives. And people all over Europe opened their houses, and free train rides and free food and all these people. So I kind of, call them, they were pilgrims, people that came there to heal, like all of the doctors that I met, but also other people like David the cook from Wales who wanted to be healed.
It's powerful. And every single human being, maybe not everyone, but I want to say, I hope every single human being at some point has that impulse to make this a better place for everyone. It really wouldn't be that hard.
Well, compassion fatigue is a real thing. When I let friends read the unedited parts of my book and the layout and everything, they said, Chris, I couldn't finish your book. I was crying too much during the first, stories, so I couldn't finish it. So then I had to rearrange the stories and put in lighter stories and funnier stories and kind of spread them out just to nudge the readers through the book.
Well, and that's good. And you did that well. And the book is really beautiful and worth people taking time with, because it will touch you. It will make you cry. It will also inspire, because these stories of people reaching out, extending themselves, going to help, that's the best of humanity. That's us at our best.
Yep.
And we really are capable of it. I mean, I've seen it in other places, not in Ukraine. I haven't been, but in New Orleans after Katrina, when things are bad, sometimes humans we can really rally.
Our best selves come out. Yep. It's just a problem with, a lot of places in the world, like America, we're just enough removed from it geographically that, we don't see the smoke, we don't hear it, we see it on the news, but there's so many other channels on it, and we want to feel a little better, so we change the channel.
I'm talking with photographer Christopher Briscoe, who's traveled the world and takes pictures and talks with people and brings those experiences to us in his books. We'll be back with more of this conversation after we hear a song by Joan Baez from her album Whistle Down the Wind, A Wish the Wars Were All Over. This is Paradigms at paradigms.life.
Down by the deep water where the sweet lilies stand, I saw pretty Polly, a ring in her hands, and the song that she sang made the whole grove to ring. My Billy has left me to fight for a king, and I wish the wars were all over. I stood in the banks to hear what she said. I'll follow my Billy, whether living or dead. The notes that she sang were the nightingale notes, how the lark and the linnet, they warble their throats. And I wish the wars were all over. I said, my dear Polly, if you'll stay with me, I'll make you as happy can be. Oh no, then she said, that never can be. I'll never be happy till my Billy I see. And I wish the wars were all over. From my parents I'll hasten away. I'll rig myself out in a young man's array, and every company that I pass by, I'll ask for my Billy, or where he does lie. And I wish the wars were all over. Were all over.
I Wish the Wars Were All Over. Joan Baez, she's been a voice promoting peace for over 60 years. Here's the next part of my conversation with photographer Christopher Briscoe. So besides sharing with people, which is obviously part of your healing from this experience, and you're going back, how have you taken care of yourself to get yourself ready so you can go back?
Well, as I said before, a lot of it was writing the book. And, when you write a book, I call it the spokes of the wheel. And the hub is you just want someone to pick up the book. And there's so many spokes. They're, one of the most important spokes. I work a lot in Africa, too. I'm going to a little country called Somaliland Friday to work with a cataract surgeon that trains doctors there and also does cataract surgery, sometimes 200 surgeries a day. Most cataract surgeons in America do like 12 a week. This guy is like Superman in the OR. So one of the most important things that I do when I go to Africa with him, and also when I went to Ukraine, is I get an interpreter. A lot of people speak some English, but when you find an interpreter who really gets what you're all about, what your stories are all about. So Mariana was my favorite, and she's also a freelance journalist in Lviv. Lviv, by the way, is the most beautiful city that I've ever been to. If you combined Paris and any great city in Italy, it's like that times 10. Cobblestone, beautiful, historic architecture. So then Mariana and I would meet every morning for coffee. She says, Christoph, okay, at 10 o'clock we go to hospital. At 2 o'clock we go to orphanage. And she is just like on it. And has, like I said, she's a freelance journalist. So she knows what I'm after. When I go back, she's going to take me to Chernobyl. So, she's integral.
Well, it's a good thing you're old enough you don't want to breed anymore because your chromosomes are going to take a hit.
There you go. I'll take
gosh.
a picture of me in a hazmat suit or something.
Yeah. But that's very interesting because I've traveled to places where I don't speak the language and I've always sort of polyglotted my way through. But I wasn't on a mission like this. I would think when you're doing something like this, having really good communication would make a huge difference.
One of the things that has opened doors for me, I did a book on Cambodia, and then I wandered around India, and like I said, Africa. I'm working on a book with the cataract surgeons. But one of the things that I've taken with me on every single trip is one of those little tiny pocket printers. You bring all this paper, and when you take someone's picture, as you see tourists and photographers all the time. At best, they'll walk up to the person and show them the back of the camera. Well, that's not really an equal trade. You've taken this person's picture, you're going to put it on the, your internet and your book, whatever. So what I do is the first thing I do is I bring out my little printer, and now that costs like $100. You can get them at any big box store. And then I'll walk into like a refugee camp or a city dump in Thailand, right across the river from where the Myanmar people have escaped. And I'll be walking through the ashes of this dump, and they'll look at me like, who is this white guy and what's he want here? And I'll just gesture, may I take your picture? And when I get the nod, I'll do it. And then a couple minutes later, I will hand them a photographic print, and they hold the print and they study it. And a lot of people, places where I've been have never seen a picture of themselves. And for me to give that, I tell people, I don't really take pictures, I give them away. And for what I do, it's one of the most personal gifts I can give.
You're a mensch. You know this word?
Tell me. What's it mean?
It's a word in Yiddish, and it just means this is a decent person. This is a good person.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, just like David, the guy, the cook from Wales, that's all I want to know is that I did something good.
Bringing this to us, it's so important that we are one people. We really are one people on this earth. And if we can feel that and see that more, then maybe that moves us in this direction where I think all hoping we're going in.
Yes. Yep. Well, Baruch, one of the good things about getting older is like I'm on the thin end of the branch, and I want to get this stuff done. I want to get it out there so that people can read my stories, see my photographs. And that's another thing that pushes me forward, is the clock is ticking.
How old are you, Christopher?
71.
71. Right on. I'm a little younger, but not quite at that thin part of the branch, but headed in that direction. And I agree. It's all about, at this point, what can we do that works? Whatever works, I'm for it.
Yep. And for me, all these 40 years of being a professional photographer and all of the other books I've done have all kind of led up to this event. This is the biggest geopolitical event since World War II. And I'll never forget when the Berlin Wall fell. And I was, just starting out as a photographer and photojournalist. I had one foot on the plane and I didn't go. And I have regretted that ever since. So I have a fabulous friend, another cataract surgeon named David Karam. And he called me up a couple of weeks into the war and he said, hey, some docs and I are going to work in the refugee camps on the Polish border. You want to come? And it took me 5 minutes to pack, so I just, I am going. And the other thing that has been kind of a theme of my life and what I saw a lot in the people I met is about getting out of your comfort zone. And most places in America are pretty darn comfortable compared, So any chance I've had through my life, I got out of my comfort zone. And when I was like 24, I rode my bicycle across America. And then I sailed to Tahiti with a buddy who built this 36-foot trimaran. So I was always, and I wasn't a macho dude, but I just knew that you have to keep edging yourself out of the comfort zone to really gain stuff.
We'll be back with the final part of my conversation with Christopher Briscoe, talking about his book, The Child on the Train, and other stories in war-torn Ukraine. But here's something from New Orleans. Here's little Freddie King with Two-Wheel Cadillac. Freddie King with Two-Wheel Cadillac. The album is Blues Medicine. Check him out. I can't wait to see Christopher Briscoe's book about New Orleans. All right, here's the final part of my conversation with Chris Briscoe.
Another guy I met, have you ever heard of World Central Kitchens?
Yes, I've been trying to get them on my show, and they've never been able to.
You got to. So this guy, I met him on the border, and he was working for World Central Kitchens. And I said, so how did you get here? He says, well, I've been an attorney for 43 years, and I retired, and I was sitting on the couch watching the news. I felt in my years of retirement, I wanted to do something more important. So I went to the computer. There were 2 slots open for volunteers for World Central Kitchens. I bought a ticket, and here I am.
Wow.
What an inspiration. What an inspiration. He just wanted to get up off the couch. And I've given talks about this in America, and invariably someone will raise their hand and said, well, what can I do? Well, you can donate. And part of me is also saying you can get up off the couch. Just go. The hardest part is leaving town. On that bicycle trip I alluded to earlier, everyone wanted to talk me out of it. The hardest part is getting out of town, not bicycling over the Rockies or the deserts or putting up with, the lack of food and sleep and all that stuff. No. It's just getting on the bicycle and get out of town.
People fear getting out of their comfort zone. And then when we do it, it blows our minds. And we realize how unimportant most of the stuff is.
Yes. And that fear that held us back.
And you get to encounter your best self and other people's best selves. And I mean, I've said so many times, my experience in New Orleans was one of the best experiences of my whole life. And it was not easy or comfortable or a lot of things, but it was beautiful and people were amazing. And to be reminded that people are amazing, right? That's great. That's better than watching a TV show.
Well, not to plug another book, but about 10 years ago, I decided that I wanted to do a book about New Orleans. So I went there twice a year for 8 years. And my book just came out last year. It's called The Spirit of New Orleans and the Characters Who Live There. And I want to, if you give me your address, I'm going to make sure that you get a copy of that book, because there is a place that I've never met so many creative people. And of course, there are a lot of broken people. But when you sit down with someone like little Freddie King, and he tells you a story about when he grew up as the son of a sharecropper, and about how he made his first guitar with a cigar box and a plank from his picket fence, and then he needed some frets, so he went in the barn and he got the wire off the hay bale. Then he needed some strings. So his dad came home from picking cotton on this big horse, and he snuck behind the horse to clip some strands off of the tail, but the horse kicked him so hard it knocked him out. So when he woke up, he clipped those little strands and he made his first guitar. And now he's 80-something and he plays the blues every night in all those great places in New Orleans. And he is a New Orleans icon. But New Orleans, what a place. I got so much out of all the people I met there.
All of this stuff we're talking about is like real life. And I think especially in industrialized societies on Earth right now, there's so much avoidance of that. There's so much hiding in, and I do it too. There's so much hiding in fiction and movies and TV, and people are, how many people spend time every day just sitting quietly perceiving? I think there's so much sadness and grief right now, and fear and anger, that people either are so immersed in that or they need ways to escape it. But really, if you go out into the real world and do real stuff with other people, that actually affects all those feelings. It helps us heal. It helps us not be stuck.
Yes. And we can get stuck really easily, and it shapes the way we think. I'll never forget, a few years ago, I went on another bicycle trip, this time with my wonderful son. We bicycled the length of Route 66 from LA to Chicago. And again, before I left town, everyone says, oh my gosh, you got to take a gun. There's drive-by shootings everywhere. And because we live in this media thing that, there are drive-by shootings right around the corner. From all of my experiences, on that trip and many others, I can tell you that 99% of the people out there will do whatever it takes to help you.
Right. And it's not about agreeing about religion or politics or any of that stuff. It's simply,
Right.
I'm a person, you're a person.
Yes, exactly.
Well, I can't wait to see the New Orleans book. I can't wait to see the cataract surgeon book. You've got a new fan.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I just want these stories to be heard.
It's been amazing to talk with you, and I really hope we speak again, and I look forward to seeing more of your work. And I'm really grateful that you have done this and are bringing these stories and these images to us. I think it's of immense value.
Well, thank you.
Christopher Briscoe, it was really a pleasure talking with you. I definitely feel like I made a friend, and I love what you're doing in the world and the heart you bring to it, and that you bring us these images and your words to help us experience a little bit of what you did. We're all part of the great human body, and what happens to one of us happens to all of us. Thank you so much for the art you make. If you'd like to know more about Christopher Briscoe, see more of his photographs, check out his books. His website is chrisbriscoe.com, CHRISBRISCOE.com. Photographs of the human condition, really. I hope you'll check him out. And if you enjoyed this episode of Paradigms, I hope you'll visit the Paradigms website, paradigms.life. There's a link there to Christopher Briscoe's photographs, and there are 560-some episodes of Paradigms there for you to check out, too. You can find Paradigms wherever you find your podcasts as well. Paradigms has a Patreon campaign, patreon.com/paradigms, if you'd like to support what we're doing. We really value our Patreon supporters. Thank you. Talking with Christopher Briscoe was a pleasure, as I've said. Looking at his photographs, they're so just potent. He really captures sort of an essence of the people he photographs. Beautiful work. You know, when we are interacting with people and we look at them, we perceive each other. When you look at a photograph that's been taken with care, you get to be a witness to the subject of the photograph in a different way. It's powerful. So let's let witness be the word for the week. Let's all witness everything. We are witnesses to everything humanity does. So let's pay attention to what we perceive. You never know what you might notice. All right, I am going to leave you with one more song. As always, this is Nancy Griffith from her album Hearts and Mind, Big Blue Ball of War. Baruch signing off for this episode of Paradigms. We'll be back next time with more inspiring people. Until then, let us witness and be well.
In 1914, this ball was at war. It went from Belgium on through Ireland, the Congo, then back home. This big blue ball of war spun on its own, spinning history in lines of blood when many souls fell off, and we all ride on. This big blue ball of war, souls with tickets to the veil, we all ride on, yeah, we all ride on. This big blue ball of war, we choose to spin around and ride this big blue ball of war. Almost a century, the blood has flowed. We've killed our men of peace around this ball and refused to hear their goals. We spend our destiny in deeds of hate. Humanity upon this ball is just a bloody fall from grace, and we all ride on. might save us all. A voice of harmony and open heart where the women teach the song. These men of evil deed can be proven wrong if we join hand to hand with Abraham, so not a soul falls off, and we'll all ride on. This big blue ball of war, souls with tickets through the veil, will all ride on, and we'll all ride on. This big blue ball of war, we'll choose to spin around and ride this big blue ball of war. We'll choose to spin around and ride this big blue ball of war.
You've been listening to Paradigms at paradigms.life.